My name is Dr. Evelyn Park. I am 36. And for most of my life, my family described my career with one sentence. She works at the hospital. Not, she is a surgeon. Not, she runs the surgical department. At my parents' anniversary dinner, my sister brought her new boyfriend, a hospital executive named Nolan Pierce. My mother introduced him like he had descended in a beam of light. Nolan manages real budgets, she said. $40 million. Real authority. Then she looked at me with the polite family smile I knew too well. Evelyn is still doing surgeries. Still. Like surgery was a stage I had failed to outgrow. I did not correct her. I did not mention that I was chief of surgery at Memorial West. I did not mention that my department controlled a $127 million budget. I did not mention that 300 people depended on my decisions. I only looked at Nolan because he was smiling, not with warmth, with recognition. 24 hours later, I walked into a budget hearing and found him presenting a plan to cut my surgical department by 18%. $23 million. 3 surgical robots reduced to 2. Emergency overtime capped. Specialized supplies replaced by cheaper vendors. And the most dangerous sentence of all. Clinical resistance is expected, but manageable. He did not know I was the clinical resistance. So I raised my hand. Nolan looked annoyed. Yes, he said. I stood up. My name is Dr. Evelyn Park, I said, chief of surgery. And before you cut $23 million from my department, you are going to explain which patient you want to lose first. The room went silent. It began at my parents' kitchen table. My father, Martin, loved titles he could understand. Vice president, director, executive. My mother, Helen, loved careers with clean clothes and dinner reservations. My older sister, Caroline, became exactly what they admired. She worked in private equity, spoke in numbers, and never came home with blood on her shoes. I became a surgeon. To my parents, that sounded dramatic but not prestigious in the way they understood. They still asked whether I was finished with training, even after residency, fellowship, and 2 board certifications. When I became the youngest chief of surgery in Memorial West history, I sent them the announcement. My mother replied with a thumbs-up emoji. 10 minutes later, she texted, "Will this mean fewer night shifts?" That was how they saw me. Tired. Useful. Always rushing somewhere. Never important enough to explain. For years, I tried. I brought home articles with my name on them. My father skimmed it and said, "Very technical." I mentioned a surgical patent. Caroline said, "So like a better tool?" At Thanksgiving, I answered a call about a ruptured aneurysm and left before dessert. The next week, my mother said I had poor work-life balance, while Caroline was praised for closing a deal at midnight. Memorial West was a level 1 trauma center, which meant the worst night of someone's life often ended under our lights. Gunshots, car crashes, ruptured organs, children with injuries no child should have. My department was not perfect, but it was alive with people who understood urgency. A good surgery department does not run on spreadsheets alone. It runs on backup plans. A 3rd robot sitting unused at 2 p.m. may look wasteful to an administrator. At 2 a.m., when 1 robot is down, 1 is in use, and a patient arrives bleeding internally, that 3rd robot can become the difference between a small incision and an open chest. Overtime looks ugly on paper, but an operation does not end because a clock says it should. Cheap supplies look efficient until a suture fails under stress. These were not dramatic opinions. They were outcomes. Which is why Nolan Pierce became a problem before we ever met at dinner. He had been hired as the new chief operating officer. Former consultant, smooth voice, perfect slides. The kind of man who believed every system was a factory if you squinted. For 6 months, he studied hospital spending. He never requested a meeting with me. Never walked through the trauma bay at 3 a.m. Never asked why our robotic systems looked underused during normal business hours. Instead, he built a plan. Then my sister brought him to dinner. Caroline was glowing that night. She said Nolan had been recruited to fix inefficiencies at Memorial West. My parents leaned forward like he was performing magic. Nolan described wasteful departments and emotional doctors who did not understand financial discipline. My father nodded. Doctors are not trained for management. I kept chewing. My mother looked at me. No offense, Evelyn. None taken, I said. Nolan smiled. Most clinicians mean well, but they are too close to the work to make objective decisions. That was when I put my fork down. What kind of clinical work? I asked. Surgery is the big one, he said. Huge budget, very political, lots of outdated habits. Caroline laughed lightly. That must drive you crazy. It does, Nolan said. But someone has to be willing to make unpopular decisions. My father raised his glass. To real leadership. Everyone drank. I did not. The next morning, my assistant forwarded me an agenda. Budget optimization hearing. Nolan Pierce presenting. Surgery reductions. Mandatory attendance. I opened the attached deck at 5:42 a.m. in my office, still wearing scrubs from a 12-hour case. By slide 4, my pulse slowed. That is what happens when anger becomes surgical. His plan cut our department by 18%. He wanted to reduce 3 surgical robots to 2 because utilization appeared low. He wanted cheaper vendors with no outcome data. He wanted to cap overtime, as if complications could follow payroll. And beside one bullet point, he had written, clinical pushback anticipated. Pushback, not expertise, not safety review. Pushback. I printed the deck. Then I printed our last 18 months of emergency surgical outcomes. Robot downtime reports. Infection rates by supply category. Case delays when staffing fell below safe thresholds. Transfers rejected by surrounding hospitals because we were the only center capable of taking them. I put everything into a red binder. At 8:55, I walked into the boardroom. Nolan was already at the front. So was the CEO. So were finance, legal, nursing leadership, and board members. Nolan did not look surprised to see me. Dr. Park, he said, glancing at the seating chart. Clinical representatives sit along the side wall. I looked at the chair he pointed to. Then I looked at the nameplate at the center of the table. Chief of Surgery. Empty. I sat there. The CEO looked up from his notes. Good morning, Evelyn. Nolan blinked. For 20 minutes, he presented as if I were not there. He showed bar graphs, cost curves, utilization percentages. He used words like aggressive, lean, scalable, and discipline. Then he reached the slide about robotic systems. Our data shows the third robot sits unused for large portions of the day. He said, reducing to 2 saves $2 million annually with minimal disruption. I raised my hand. He frowned. Questions at the end? This cannot wait until the end. The CEO leaned back. Go ahead. Evelyn. Nolan's jaw tightened. I opened my red binder. Your utilization model is based on scheduled elective cases. Did you include emergent cases after hours? Nolan glanced at his slide. Emergency cases are statistically irregular. They are trauma, I said. Irregular is the point. A board member looked down at the deck. I continued. Last quarter, the third robot was used in 17 emergency cases where the other 2 systems were unavailable. 6 involved ruptured vessels. 3 involved pediatric trauma. Nolan said, that is anecdotal. I slid the first packet across the table. Names removed, case numbers included, outcomes attached. The room changed. Not loudly, just enough. I turned to the CEO. Without the third robot, at least 11 patients would have required open conversion, longer recovery, higher infection risk, higher ICU cost. The chief nursing officer nodded. Nolan clicked to the next slide. Supplies, he said, louder than before. The proposed vendor offers 25% savings. For which procedures? I asked. Across surgical categories. That is not an answer. His face reddened. I turned another page. The vendor you selected has not been validated for complex vascular reconstruction, transplant support, or high contamination trauma. Acceptable for routine low-risk procedures is not acceptable for the cases this hospital is certified to treat. Nolan said, We can pilot in low acuity cases under infection surveillance. I said, we cannot blanket replace supplies in a level 1 trauma center because your spreadsheet likes the discount. Then came overtime. Nolan tried to recover. Overtime culture must be addressed. Surgery cannot continue operating as if every delay is an emergency. I looked at him for a long second. Mr. Pierce, have you ever told a bleeding patient that their complication is outside approved labor hours? The room went still. He said, that is not what I meant, but it is what your policy does. I opened the final section. Here are the last 12 cases that exceeded scheduled OR time by more than 3 hours. Unexpected adhesions, anesthesia instability, uncontrolled bleeding, equipment contamination. 2 patients coded, all survived. I looked around the table. Overtime is not a luxury in surgery. It is what happens when reality refuses to fit the schedule. Nolan, did you review this plan with Dr. Park before today? Nolan hesitated. No. Why not? I was under the impression clinical department heads would create bias. I closed my binder. You spent 6 months analyzing a department without speaking to the person accountable for it. I said, you treated surgery like a factory line, but we do not manufacture parts. We save lives. Then the CEO said, we will pause the proposed cuts. Nolan's face went pale, but I was not finished. I am not opposed to savings, I said. I am opposed to pretending savings exist when costs are moved from finance to patients. By the end, we had a new plan. No robot removed. No blanket supply replacement. A monitored vendor pilot only in safe categories. A scheduling redesign to reduce waste without cutting safe coverage. 7% savings projected. Because 3 nights later, Memorial West held its annual donor gala. 500 people. Black ties. Champagne. My parents attended because Caroline invited them as Nolan's guests. They thought Nolan would be honored. They thought I would be somewhere in the hospital, Still doing surgeries? I almost did not go. Then my assistant said, "Dr. Park, they are announcing the Surgical Innovation Fund tonight. You are the keynote." I wore a navy gown because it was the only formal dress that did not make me feel like I was pretending. When I arrived, I saw my family near the front. My mother smiled vaguely, then looked behind me, searching for someone more important. Caroline waved me over. "Evelyn, you made it," she said. "Nolan is having such a hard week. The doctors were difficult." Nolan stood beside her, stiff as glass. My father clapped him on the shoulder. "You will straighten them out." Nolan looked at me. For once, he did not smile. Dinner began. Speeches followed. Then the CEO walked to the podium. "Tonight," he said, "we honor the department that has made Memorial West one of the top surgical centers in the region." My mother leaned toward Caroline. "Which department?" Caroline whispered. "Surgery, I think." The CEO continued. "And no one has shaped that department more than the youngest chief of surgery in our hospital's history, responsible for more than 300 clinical professionals and a $127 million budget. Please welcome Dr. Evelyn Park." For 1 second, I heard nothing. Then the room stood. 500 people rising. Applause washing over me. I walked past my parents' table. My mother's mouth was open. My father looked from me to the stage to Nolan, as if the room had rearranged itself. Caroline whispered, "Chief of Surgery?" I stepped onto the stage. For years, I wanted my family to understand. But standing there, looking at people who already did, I realized something. I did not need my family to make my work real. It had been real the whole time. I spoke about the Surgical Innovation Fund, about patient safety, about technology that matters only when it serves judgment, about confusing unused capacity with waste. Then I looked directly at Nolan's table. "Efficiency matters," I said, "but in medicine, the most expensive mistake is forgetting that a patient is not a spreadsheet." My mother wiped her eyes. After the gala, they found me near the donor wall. My mother was the first to speak. "We did not know." I looked at her. "You did not ask." My father's voice was quiet. "We thought Caroline was the one who..." He stopped. I finished for him. "The successful one?" He closed his eyes. "I think we needed that story," she said. "Me successful, you struggling. It made everything simple." For a moment, I saw them clearly. Not as villains, as people who had loved a version of me small enough to fit their assumptions. And I was done shrinking. My father said, "Can we start over?" I thought about every article unopened, every achievement misunderstood, every holiday where I had been tired and dismissed. "No," I said softly, "but you can start listening." That was the most generous thing I had left to give. Nolan resigned 6 weeks later. Officially, it was to pursue other opportunities. Unofficially, the board had lost confidence in a man who confused not knowing with objectivity. The revised budget plan worked. We saved millions without removing critical capacity. Infection rates stayed stable. And the third robot Nolan wanted to sell was used 11 times in the next 2 months for emergency cases no spreadsheet predicted. My family tries now. My mother reads my hospital newsletters and underlines unfamiliar terms. My father asks questions and waits for answers. But I know what I no longer need. I no longer need people who do not understand my work to decide its value. I no longer need a dinner table to recognize what an operating room proves. My name is Dr. Evelyn Park. I am not still doing surgeries. I am leading the people who do them. And if there is one thing I learned from all of it, it is this. Never let someone who only reads the spreadsheet tell you what a life is worth. Because some empty rooms are not waste. Some quiet daughters are not struggling. They carry worlds no one bothered to see.